The rifle shot split the pre-dawn silence like thunder, and Clara Meredith dropped flat against her horse's neck as the bullet whined past where her head had been seconds before. She kicked her mare hard, urging the animal into the scrub brush while her heart hammered against her ribs, the precious leather satchel of medicine bottles pressing against her spine where she had strapped it beneath her coat. It was September of 1882, and somewhere in the barren stretch between Tonopah Junction, Nevada, and the mining camp at Silver Ridge, someone had just tried to kill her, and the 40 miles of dangerous territory ahead suddenly felt like 400. The second shot never came. Clara held her breath in the gray half-light, listening to the desert wake around her while her mare stamped nervously beneath a twisted Joshua tree. She had left town 3 hours before dawn precisely to avoid attention, knowing that the men who had ransacked Doc Winter's office 2 nights ago would be watching the main roads. They wanted the morphine she carried, the laudanum, the precious quinine that could save the fever-stricken miners at Silver Ridge. The telegraph had come 4 days ago, desperate and pleading. Half the camp was down with the fever. Women and children were dying. The regular supply wagon would not arrive for another 2 weeks. Clara had not hesitated. She had worked as Doc Winter's assistant for 3 years, learning everything the old physician could teach her about medicine and healing. When he had taken the bullet meant for the card cheat in the Lucky Dollar Saloon 6 months back, he had made her promise to continue his work. So she had packed the medicine herself, choosing every bottle with care, wrapping them in cloth to prevent breaking. She had told no one of her plans except Martha Henderson, the boarding house owner who had raised her after consumption took her parents when she was 12. That had been her first mistake. She should have told no one at all. Clara waited until full sunrise before moving again, studying the landscape for any sign of the shooter. The Nevada desert stretched in every direction, painted in shades of rust and gold by the climbing sun. Mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth. She saw nothing moving except a hawk circling high overhead. Carefully, she urged her mare back toward the trail, every nerve alert. That was when she saw him. The cowboy sat astride a paint horse about 50 yards distant, positioned on a small rise where he could observe both her position and the direction from which the shot had come. He wore typical range clothes, dusty denims and a dark vest over a blue shirt, a weathered hat pulled low against the glare. A rifle rested across his saddle, but he made no move to raise it. He simply watched her with an intensity she could feel even at this distance. Clara's hand moved to the small revolver tucked in her belt. Doc Winters had insisted she learn to shoot, though she had never fired at anything living. Her mouth was dry as she called out, "You planning to sit there all day, or you have business with me?" The cowboy touched his hat brim in a gesture that might have been respectful or might have been mocking. Then he turned his horse and began riding parallel to her route, maintaining that same 50-yard distance. He did not approach. He did not speak. He simply rode, positioned between her and the direction from which the shot had originated. Clara frowned, uncertain what to make of this development. She had seen the man around Tonopah Junction a few times over the past month, always on the edges of things, never causing trouble but never quite fitting in either. He had the look of a drifter, someone passing through on his way to somewhere else. She thought she had heard someone call him Nathaniel once, at the Mercantile, but she could not be certain. She had no choice but to continue. Every hour of delay meant more lives at risk in Silver Ridge. Clara checked her mare's girth strap, verified that the medicine satchel remained secure, and started forward at a steady trot. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something thick and hot. The cowboy kept pace, silent and watchful, never closing the distance between them. By midday, Clara's unease had transformed into something closer to curiosity. Whoever this man was, he had clearly appointed himself her guardian, though she had not asked for his protection and did not particularly want it. She was 23 years old and had been taking care of herself for long enough that she resented the implication that she needed a man's help. Still, someone had shot at her that morning, and the cowboy's presence might deter another attempt. When she stopped to rest her horse and take water from her canteen, the cowboy stopped as well, dismounting to let his paint drink from a small seep spring. Clara walked her mare over, deciding that if he was going to follow her all the way to Silver Ridge, they might as well establish some ground rules. "I did not ask for company," she said without preamble. The cowboy looked up. His eyes were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, set in a face that was younger than she had expected. He could not be more than 25 or 26, with a few days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw and a white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, with the faint trace of an accent she could not quite place. "No, you did not. I am riding to Silver Ridge myself. Figured I might as well ride in the same direction as a lady who has men trying to kill her." "What makes you think anyone is trying to kill me?" Clara demanded, though the question was absurd given the morning's events. "The bullet that nearly took your head off around dawn gave me a clue." He replaced his hat after wiping sweat from his forehead. "Also, I was in the Lucky Dollar 2 nights ago when those men were talking about the medicine shipment to Silver Ridge. They were making plans to intercept it. When I saw you leaving town this morning with a heavy pack, I put the pieces together." Clara felt a chill despite the heat. "You followed me from town. I rode out ahead of you and circled back. Wanted to make sure no one was setting up an ambush on the trail. Found a man with a rifle positioned on that ridge where the shot came from. He took off when I approached, but he will likely try again. Why do you care?" The question came out more hostile than Clara intended, but she was tired and frightened and not accustomed to accepting help from strangers. The cowboy was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her with an expression she could not read. "My sister died of fever 2 years back," he said finally. "Camp where we were working had no medicine, no doctor. She was 16. I figure if you are trying to get medicine to people who need it, the least I can do is make sure you get there alive." The simple honesty of his words deflated Clara's anger. She looked away, feeling suddenly ashamed of her suspicion. "I am sorry about your sister. Me too." He gathered his reins. "Name is Nathaniel Xerxes, though most people call me Nate. And before you ask, yes, my father had peculiar taste in names, thought it sounded distinguished." Despite everything, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "Clara Meredith. And I suppose if you are determined to ride to Silver Ridge anyway, I cannot stop you from taking the same trail." "No, you cannot." There might have been the ghost of a smile on his face, though it was hard to tell with the hat shadow. "We should keep moving. Another 6 hours of daylight and we can cover maybe 15 miles if we push. There is a water stop at Dead Man's Canyon where we can camp for the night." Clara knew the place he meant, though the name was not encouraging. "How do you know this country so well?" "Worked the mines around here for a while, before I realized I would rather starve in the open air than get rich underground." Nate swung back into his saddle with easy grace. "Shall we?" They rode through the afternoon heat, following the rough trail that wound between rock formations and across dried creek beds. Nate kept his earlier position, maintaining distance but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Clara found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, studying the easy way he sat his horse, the constant awareness in how he scanned their surroundings. He was clearly a man accustomed to trouble, someone who had learned to watch his back. The sun was slanting toward the western mountains when they reached Dead Man's Canyon, a narrow cleft in the rocks where a small spring provided reliable water. Clara was exhausted, her legs aching from the long ride and her nerves frayed from constant vigilance. She dismounted stiffly, leading her mare to the water. Nate was already unsaddling his paint. "I will gather wood for a fire. You should check your medicine, make sure nothing broke during the ride." Clara wanted to argue on principle, but she was too tired and he was right. She carefully removed the satchel and unwrapped each bottle, checking for cracks or leaks. Everything appeared intact. The morphine, the laudanum, the quinine, the carbolic acid for disinfecting wounds, the Dover's powder for pain. She had even packed some of Doc Winter's special fever tea, though she knew the miners would probably prefer whiskey. By the time she finished her inventory, Nate had a small fire going and was setting up a basic camp. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had spent many nights under the stars. Clara found herself wondering about him, about where he had come from and where he was going. To Silver Ridge, he had said, but why? There were mines there, true, but he had just said he preferred to avoid underground work. "You are staring," Nate observed without looking up from where he was laying out his bedroll. Clara felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. "I was just wondering why you are really going to Silver Ridge. I told you the truth. I heard about the fever outbreak and I have experience with that sort of thing. Figured they might need extra hands, even if I am not a doctor." "Have you done medical work before?" "Some. Worked with an army surgeon for a year after I left the mines. Learned how to assist with basic procedures, how to keep instruments clean, how to hold a man down while the doctor saws off his leg." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the weight behind the words. "That must have been difficult," she said quietly. "It was necessary." Nate finally looked at her across the fire. "You ever assisted with surgery?" "A few times. Bullet removals mostly. One amputation after a logging accident. Doc Winters talked me through it." Clara wrapped her arms around her knees, remembering the terror and the blood, the desperate prayer that her hands would remain steady. "The man lived, though he cursed me for a butcher afterward. Did he keep the leg?" "No." "Then you saved his life, and he is an ungrateful fool." Nate pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag and tossed it across to her. "Jerky and hardtack. Not fancy, but it will keep you going." They ate in companionable silence while the desert night settled around them. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun disappeared, and Clara was grateful for the fire's warmth. Above them, stars emerged in impossible profusion, a river of light across the black sky. She had always loved the desert nights, the sense of vast space and possibility. "Tell me about the men who are after the medicine," Nate said eventually. "How many? What do they want?" Clara considered the question. There were 3 of them at Doc Winter's office. The leader was a man named Carter, big fellow with a red beard. He runs a saloon in the rough part of town. "I think he wants to sell the medicine himself, charge whatever he wants to the desperate people in Silver Ridge." "That sounds about right. Men like Carter see opportunity in suffering." Nate's voice had gone cold. "Did he threaten you directly?" "He does not know I am the one carrying the medicine. At least, I hope he does not. Martha Henderson was supposed to spread the story that Doc Winters sent his nephew with the shipment, traveling by the northern route. I came south, hoping to avoid them. The shooter this morning suggests they were not entirely fooled." Nate poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "We will need to be more careful tomorrow. This stretch between here and Silver Ridge has a lot of places for ambushes." "I know the risks," Clara said, more sharply than she intended. "I knew them when I decided to make this trip. I am not questioning your courage. I am just saying you do not have to face those risks alone." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Clara looked across the fire at this stranger who had appointed himself her protector, this man who owed her nothing and yet had chosen to put himself in danger on her behalf. She wanted to argue, to insist on her independence, but the truth was that she was grateful for his presence. The thought of facing tomorrow's ride alone, knowing that men with guns were hunting her, made her stomach clench with fear. "Thank you," she said finally, "for coming, for helping. I know I have not been very gracious about it." Nate's expression softened slightly. "You do not owe me gratitude. You are doing something brave and necessary. The least I can do is make sure you survive long enough to complete it. Still, thank you." They settled in for the night, Nate insisting that he would take the first watch. Clara protested, but could not keep her eyes open, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline. She wrapped herself in her bedroll, using her saddle as a pillow, and fell into uneasy sleep. She woke sometime in the deep hours of the night to find Nate seated near the dying fire, his rifle across his knees, staring out into the darkness. The moon had risen, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Clara watched him for a moment, noting the tension in his shoulders, the alertness in his posture. He looked like a man who had learned to sleep lightly if at all. "You should rest," she said softly. "I can keep watch for a while." Nate turned, and in the moonlight his eyes looked almost luminous. "I am fine. Go back to sleep. You need rest as much as I do, more probably if there is going to be trouble tomorrow." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Wake me if you hear anything, anything at all. I will." They traded places, and Clara was surprised when Nate actually lay down and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. She sat with his rifle across her lap, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. The night was full of small sounds, the rustle of wind through the rocks, the distant cry of a coyote, the soft breathing of the horses. She found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken, how 3 days ago she had been safely in Tanapa Junction, and now she was sitting in the desert with a cowboy she barely knew, hunted by criminals, carrying medicine that could save or doom dozens of lives. It was terrifying. It was also, in some strange way, exhilarating. The hours passed slowly. Clara watched the stars wheel overhead and thought about the people waiting in Silver Ridge, the children burning with fever, the mothers desperate for help. She thought about Doc Winters, who had believed in her enough to teach her his skills, to trust her with his legacy. She thought about Nate, this quiet man who had stepped into her life like a character from a dime novel, appearing exactly when she needed him most. She did not believe in fate or providence. Life had taught her that the world was random and often cruel, that good people died young while the wicked prospered. But sitting there in the moonlight, keeping watch over a man who had chosen to protect her without being asked, she felt something shift in her chest, some tightly held guard beginning to loosen. Dawn came in shades of pink and gold. Clara woke Nate as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, and they broke camp quickly, eating more jerky and drinking water that tasted of minerals and desert stone. The horses were rested and ready. Clara checked the medicine satchel one more time, then secured it firmly beneath her coat. 25 miles to Silver Ridge, Nate said, studying the trail ahead. "If we push hard and nothing goes wrong, we can make it by nightfall. And if something goes wrong, then we deal with it." He swung into his saddle and looked down at her, his expression serious. "Stay close to me today. If shooting starts, you run. Do not try to fight, do not try to be a hero. Just get that medicine to Silver Ridge. That is what matters. Clara wanted to argue, but she recognized the sense in his words. She was not a gunfighter. Her value lay in the medicine she carried and the healing knowledge she possessed. All right, but the same goes for you. If it comes to a choice between saving me and saving yourself, you save yourself. No deal. Nate turned his horse toward the trail. Come on, we are burning daylight. They rode hard through the morning, covering ground at a pace that made Clara's mare blow and foam. The landscape grew increasingly rugged, all broken rock and steep ravines. This was country where a dozen men could hide and never be seen, where every turn of the trail brought new dangers. Clara's nerves were stretched taut as wire. Around midday, Nate suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. Clara reined in immediately, her heart leaping into her throat. What is it? Someone ahead. On the trail. He pointed to where dust rose in the distance, moving in their direction. Too much dust for one rider, at least 3, maybe 4. Could be anyone. Miners, travelers, could be, but we are not taking chances. Nate studied the terrain with a practiced eye. There. That ravine to the left. We can circle around, come back to the trail once they pass. They urged their horses off the main path, picking their way carefully down a rocky slope into a narrow canyon. The going was treacherous, all loose stone and hidden crevices. Clara held her breath every time her mare stumbled, knowing that a broken leg out here would be a death sentence for the animal and possibly for her as well. They had just reached the canyon floor when the first shot rang out. Rock exploded inches from Clara's head, and she cried out in shock. Nate was already moving, his rifle coming up as he scanned the canyon rim. There, 2 of them. Go, go! Clara kicked her mare into a run, leaning low over the animal's neck as more shots echoed through the canyon. She heard Nate's rifle answer, the sharp crack distinct from the deeper boom of the ambusher's weapons. The canyon twisted and turned, providing sporadic cover. Clara focused on staying in the saddle, on keeping the medicine satchel secure, on not thinking about the bullets that whined past her like angry hornets. The canyon opened onto a flat area studded with boulders. Nate pulled up beside her, his face tight with concentration. Keep going. I will hold them here. No, I am not leaving you, Clara, damn it, this is not a debate. Those men want you and what you are carrying. Get out of here. And let them kill you. Absolutely not. Clara pulled her revolver, though her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. We fight together or we run together. Choose. For a moment she thought he would argue. Then something shifted in his expression, frustration giving way to what might have been respect. Together then. Get behind those rocks. They dismounted and took cover, the horses milling nervously nearby. Clara could see the riders approaching now, 3 men on horseback, spread out to make harder targets. The red-bearded man in the center had to be Carter. Even at this distance, she could see the cruel set of his features. Miss Meredith, Carter called out when he was close enough. We know you have the medicine. Hand it over and we will let you and your friend ride away. You will have to come and take it, Clara shouted back, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Carter laughed. Have it your way. Boys, take them. The 3 men urged their horses forward, rifles raised. Nate fired, and one of the men tumbled from his saddle with a cry. The other 2 scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the confined space. Clara fired her revolver, aiming at Carter, but the range was too great and her hands too unsteady. The bullet went wide. She cursed and tried to aim again, but Carter had dismounted and taken cover. Beside her, Nate was firing with methodical precision, keeping the attackers pinned down. Can you reload? He asked between shots. I think so. Clara had watched Doc Winters clean and load his revolver dozens of times. Her fingers fumbled with the cylinder, spilling one of the precious cartridges before she managed to get it loaded properly. The fight stretched on, minutes that felt like hours. Neither side could gain a clear advantage. Then one of Carter's men made a mistake, breaking cover to try for a better angle. Nate's rifle spoke and the man went down hard, not moving. That left only Carter. The big man seemed to realize his position had deteriorated because he called out again, his tone less confident. "This is not over, Miss Meredith. You cannot watch your back forever. Leave now, and you might live to regret this another day," Nate shouted back. There was a long silence. Then Clara heard the sound of a horse departing at speed. Nate kept his rifle trained on the rocks where Carter had been hiding, waiting. Minutes ticked past. Finally, he lowered the weapon. "He is gone," took his horse and ran. Clara became aware that she was shaking violently, her teeth chattering despite the heat. The reality of what had just happened crashed over her. Men had died. She had fired at another human being with intent to kill. Her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the rocky ground. Nate was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder. "Breathe, just breathe, it is over." "I almost got us both killed," Clara whispered. "If you had not been here, but I was here. And you were brave. You stood your ground when you could have run." His voice was gentle, anchoring. "The first time is always the hardest. The shaking will pass." "Have you killed men before?" "Yes." No hesitation, no pride, just a simple acknowledgement of fact. "In the war, when I was barely old enough to hold a rifle. Afterward, a few times when I had no choice." "It never gets easy, and if it ever does, that is when you need to worry about your soul." Clara looked up at him, at this man who had fought to protect her, who had killed to keep her safe. His gray eyes were troubled, but his hand on her shoulder was steady and warm. She reached up and covered his hand with her own. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for not letting me face this alone." Nate's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his features before he shuddered it away. "We should check on the men who went down, then get moving. Carter might come back with reinforcements." They approached the fallen men carefully, but both were beyond help. Nate searched them quickly, finding nothing but a few coins and tobacco. He looked troubled as he straightened. "What is it?" Clara asked. These men were not outlaws. "Look at their hands, their clothes. They were working men, probably from town. Carter must have paid them to do this." The implication made Clara feel sick. These were not hardened criminals. They were probably desperate men who had taken a job for the money, not understanding what they were getting into. Now they were dead, and for what? Medicine that should have belonged to everyone who needed it. "We have to keep going," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "If we stop now, if we turn back, they died for nothing, and so do the people waiting in Silver Ridge." Nate looked at her with something like admiration. "You are tougher than you look, Clara Meredith. I had good teachers." She walked to where her mare stood trembling, soothing the animal with soft words and gentle hands. The medicine satchel was still secure. Nothing had broken during the fight. That was something, at least. They rode hard for the next several hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ambush site. The sun climbed toward its zenith and began its descent. The mountains ahead grew larger, and Clara knew that somewhere in those peaks lay Silver Ridge. As the afternoon wore on, the adrenaline drained from her system, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She swayed in the saddle, catching herself nodding off more than once. Nate noticed and called a brief halt, insisting she drink water and eat some more jerky. "I am fine," Clara protested weakly. "You are dead on your feet. We will rest here for 20 minutes, then push on. We are close now, maybe 2 hours out." They sat in the shade of a rock outcropping, not speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Clara found herself studying Nate's profile. the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. He was handsome in a rough-edged way, she realized, though that was hardly the most important thing about him. What struck her more was his competence, his calm in the face of danger, the way he had risked his life without hesitation to protect her. "Why did you really come?" she asked suddenly. "And do not tell me it was just about your sister. You could have warned me about Carter and his men without risking your own neck." Nate was quiet for so long that Clara thought he would not answer. Then he said, "When I saw you in town preparing for this trip, you reminded me of someone." "Your sister?" "No, me. The person I used to be before the war, before everything went wrong. You had this determination in your eyes, this absolute certainty that what you were doing was right and necessary. I used to feel that way once. I wanted to remember what it was like." The honesty in his words pierced something in Clara's chest. She understood what he was saying, understood the bone-deep weariness of someone who had seen too much, done too much, lost too much. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You are a good man, Nathaniel Xerxes." He looked down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. "I have done things that would make you think otherwise. I doubt that, and even if it is true, what matters is who you choose to be now." Clara squeezed his hand gently. "You chose to help someone who needed it. That counts for something." Nate turned his hand so their palms pressed together, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You are an unusual woman, Clara Meredith. I will take that as a compliment. It was meant as one." They sat there for a moment longer, hands joined, something fragile and new forming between them. Then Nate reluctantly pulled away, rising to his feet. "We should move. Sun will be down in a few hours, and I would rather reach Silver Ridge in daylight." The last leg of the journey passed without incident. They climbed into the mountains, following a rough road that switchbacked up steep slopes. The air grew cooler, scented with pine. Clara's spirits rose as the exhaustion of the long ride fell away, replaced by anticipation. They were going to make it. Against all odds, they were going to deliver the medicine. Silver Ridge came into view as the sun touched the western peaks, a collection of rough buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Clara could hear the distant sounds of voices, the clang of hammers. It looked like civilization. However rough and temporary, as they rode down the main street, people emerged from buildings to stare at them. Many looked haggard and worn, and Clara saw signs of illness everywhere. The woman coughing into a rag, the child with the feverish flush on his cheeks, the makeshift infirmary tent set up outside what looked like a saloon. A tall man with a doctor's bag hurried toward them, his face lined with exhaustion. "Thank God, are you from Tanapa Junction? Did you bring the medicine?" Clara dismounted stiffly, every muscle protesting. "I am Clara Meredith, assistant to Doc Winters. I have quinine, morphine, laudanum, carbolic acid, and fever tea." The doctor's face crumpled with relief. "I am Dr. Samuel Harrison. We have been waiting, praying. The fever has taken 12 people so far, and we have at least 40 more who are sick." "Without medicine," he broke off, shaking his head. "Come. We need to start treatment immediately." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Clara worked alongside Dr. Harrison, organizing the medicine, determining dosages, administering treatment to the sickest patients. Nate helped where he could, carrying water, holding down delirious patients, cleaning instruments with the careful precision he had learned from the army surgeon. They worked through the night by lamplight, moving from patient to patient. Some were miners, strong men reduced to shivering wrecks by the fever. Others were women and children, families who had followed their husbands and fathers to this remote camp in search of fortune. All of them were desperately ill, and all of them needed help. Clara fell into the familiar rhythm of medical work, the focus required to mix medicines properly, to check pulses and breathing, to offer comfort where comfort was possible. She had done this countless times with Doc Winters, but never on this scale, never with so many lives hanging in the balance. Sometime after midnight, Dr. Harrison touched her shoulder. "Miss Meredith, you need to rest. You have been working for nearly 12 hours straight. There are still patients who need, and you will be no good to them if you collapse from exhaustion. There is a boarding house 2 buildings down. The owner, Mrs. Chen, has a room ready for you. Sleep for a few hours. I will wake you if the situation changes." Clara wanted to argue, but she could barely keep her eyes open. She looked around for Nate and found him in the corner of the infirmary tent, carefully sponging down a fevered child while speaking in low, soothing tones. The sight made her heart contract. As if sensing her gaze, Nate looked up. Their eyes met across the tent, and something passed between them, some wordless understanding. He nodded slightly, and she understood the message. "Go. Rest. I will keep watch." The boarding house was a simple affair, but the bed was clean and the room blessedly quiet. Clara stripped off her dusty clothes and washed as best she could with the water in the basin. Then she fell into bed and was asleep before her head fully hit the pillow. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she could not remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The journey, the ambush, Silver Ridge, the desperate hours of treating the sick. She sat up quickly, guilt washing over her. How long had she slept? What if patients had died while she rested? Someone had left a tray on the small table by the door. Coffee, bread, and what looked like fried eggs. Clara's stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten a proper meal in days. She ate quickly, then dressed in the clean clothes that had also mysteriously appeared, someone's spare outfit that was slightly too large but serviceable. When she returned to the infirmary tent, she found Nate asleep on a bench outside, his hat pulled over his eyes. Dr. Harrison was making rounds, and he looked up with a smile when Clara entered. "You are a miracle worker, Miss Meredith. The fever has broken in 15 patients overnight. 3 more came through the crisis an hour ago. I think we might actually save most of them." Relief flooded through Clara so intensely that she had to steady herself against a tent pole. "Thank God. What about the child Nate was caring for? Young Tommy. Fever broke 2 hours ago. He is sleeping peacefully now. Your friend stayed with him all night." Clara looked back at where Nate dozed outside, this man who had given up sleep to comfort a stranger's sick child. Her heart felt too large for her chest. "He is not just a friend," she said quietly, surprising herself. Dr. Harrison gave her a knowing look. "No, I suspect he is not. He was quite adamant that no one disturb your rest, threatened to physically remove anyone who tried. That is not the behavior of a mere traveling companion. We only met 3 days ago." Some connections do not require time to form, they simply are. The doctor returned his attention to his patient charts. "Go wake him. The man needs rest, and he will not take it unless you order him to." Clara stepped outside into the crisp mountain morning. The air was clean and cool, scented with pine and wood smoke. She approached Nate quietly, not wanting to startle him. Up close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion around his mouth. "Nate," she said softly, touching his shoulder. He was awake instantly, alert and focused. "Clara, is something wrong?" "Yes, you have been awake all night and you need to rest. I am fine. You are half dead on your feet. Dr. Harrison has things under control. Come on, I am taking you to the boarding house." Nate started to protest, then seemed to recognize the futility. "You are very bossy when it comes to medical matters. I learned from the best. Now move." She took him to the boarding house, securing a room next to her own. Nate looked around the simple space with something like wonder. A real bed. I had almost forgotten what that looked like. "Then I suggest you get reacquainted with it. Sleep. I will check on you in a few hours." Clara turned to leave, but Nate caught her hand. "Wait. Before you go, I need to say something." She turned back, her heart suddenly beating faster. "What is it?" Nate looked uncharacteristically uncertain, struggling with words. Finally, he said, "These past 3 days, riding with you, fighting beside you, working to help these people. It is the first time in years that I have felt like I was doing something that mattered. Like I was worth something beyond just survival. I wanted you to know that. I wanted to thank you for reminding me what that feels like." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She stepped closer, reaching up to cup his bearded cheek with her hand. "You were always worth something, Nate. You just needed to remember." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. "I do not want to leave when this is over. I do not want to go back to drifting, to being alone." "Then do not." The words were out before Clara could think them through, but she did not regret them. "Stay. In Silver Ridge or in Tanapa Junction or wherever you want. Just stay." Nate opened his eyes, and what Clara saw there made her breath catch. "Are you asking me to stay with you?" "Yes." She had never been more certain of anything. "We barely know each other, and this is probably insane, but yes, I am asking you to stay." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, he was smiling, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Then I will stay. For as long as you will have me. That might be quite a while." "I was hoping you would say that." Clara left him to sleep, her mind whirling with the implications of what had just happened. She had invited a man she barely knew to remain in her life, had opened her heart to someone whose history she only understood in fragments. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt light, almost giddy with possibility. The next few days passed in a blur of medical work. With Dr. Harrison's guidance, Clara treated patient after patient, administering medicine, monitoring fevers, changing bandages on those with secondary infections. The quinine proved effective against the fever, and the mortality rate dropped dramatically. By the end of the week, only one more patient had been lost, an elderly miner whose lungs had been damaged by years of breathing rock dust. Nate recovered his strength and made himself useful around the camp, repairing broken equipment, helping to build a more permanent infirmary structure, and generally making friends with everyone he met. Clara watched him integrate into the community and felt a fierce pride. This was who he truly was, she realized. Not a drifter, not a gunfighter, but a man who needed to be needed, who thrived when he could help others. On the 8th day after their arrival, a supply wagon finally reached Silver Ridge from the north. The driver was astonished to learn that medicine had already arrived from Tanapa Junction, even more astonished when he heard about the ambush and the gunfight. "Carter and his boys are in jail," the driver reported. "The sheriff caught wind of what they were planning and arrested them 2 days after you left. Turns out one of Carter's men got cold feet and confessed the whole scheme." Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The threat was over. They were safe. That evening, the townspeople of Silver Ridge organized a celebration dinner to thank Clara and Nate for their help. It was a simple affair, held in the largest saloon with food contributed by various families. Clara found herself the center of attention, people pressing her hand and offering tearful thanks. She deflected as much credit as she could to Dr. Harrison, but the people insisted on recognizing her courage in making the dangerous journey. Nate stood back during most of it, content to let Clara have her moment. But when one of the miners proposed a toast to the brave lady and the cowboy who rode beside her, Nate was pulled forward to stand next to Clara. She slipped her hand into his, feeling his fingers close, warm and strong around hers. "To Miss Meredith and Mr. Xerxes," the miner called out. "May they always ride together." The crowd roared approval, raising glasses of whiskey and beer. Clara looked up at Nate and found him watching her with such warmth in his gray eyes that it made her dizzy. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, "What do you say? Think we can manage that?" "I think we already are," she whispered back. They stayed in Silver Ridge for another week, helping Dr. Harrison establish a more permanent medical facility and training several townswomen in basic nursing care. The work was satisfying, but Clara found herself thinking about Tonopah Junction, about Doc Winter's practice sitting empty, about the life she had left behind. One evening, she and Nate took a walk up the mountainside, away from the bustle of the camp. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They found a flat rock and sat together, looking out over the valley below. "I need to go back to Tonopah Junction," Clara said. "Doc Winters left me his practice and there are people there who depend on me." "I know." Nate did not sound surprised. "When do we leave?" You asked me to stay with you. That means I go where you go." He turned to look at her. "Unless you have changed your mind." "No, God, no." Clara took his hand. "But are you sure? Tonopah Junction is a small town. It might be boring after all this excitement." Nate laughed, a rich sound that made Clara smile. "I have had enough excitement to last a lifetime. Small and boring sounds perfect, especially if you are there." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. Clara leaned against Nate's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, warm and solid. She thought about the journey that had brought them together, the danger and the fear and the desperate hope. 3 weeks ago, she had been alone, facing an impossible task. Now she had a partner, someone who had proven he would stand beside her through anything. "I love you," she said quietly, testing the words. Nate's arm tightened around her. "I love you too. Have since the moment you pointed that revolver at me and told me we fight together or run together. That is when I knew." "Knew what?" "That I would follow you anywhere, that I had found something worth staying for." Clara turned in his arms and kissed him properly, putting all her emotion into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but marry me anyway. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life riding beside you, fighting beside you, building something real together." Clara's heart felt like it might burst. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in Silver Ridge 3 days later, with Dr. Harrison officiating and half the town in attendance. Clara wore a simple dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew from fabric purchased at the mercantile. Nate had shaved and borrowed a clean shirt, and he looked so handsome that Clara could barely breathe when she saw him waiting at the makeshift altar. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When Dr. Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Nate kissed Clara thoroughly, and she laughed against his lips, dizzy with joy. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house room, and if the walls were thin and the bed creaked, neither of them cared. Clara had never been with a man before, and Nate was gentle and patient, guiding her through the unfamiliar territory with such tenderness that she wanted to weep. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin to skin, talking quietly about their dreams and plans. "I want to expand Doc Winter's practice," Clara said, tracing patterns on Nate's chest. "Bring in another doctor or two, maybe establish a small hospital. There are so many people in these mining towns who need medical care." "I will help however I can," Nate promised. I am not a doctor, but I can build and I can assist with basic procedures. We will make it work." "We will," Clara agreed, believing it absolutely. They left Silver Ridge the following week, accompanied for the first half of the journey by a group of miners heading to Tanapa Junction. The safety in numbers was welcome, and the trip passed without incident. When they finally rode into town, Clara felt a surge of homecoming. This was her place. These were her people. Martha Henderson met them at the boarding house with tears streaming down her face. "Thank God you are safe. When we heard about Carter's arrest, about what he had planned, I was so afraid. And then the weeks passed with no word." She pulled Clara into a fierce embrace, then stepped back to look at Nate. "And who is this?" "This is my husband, Nathaniel Xerxes." "Nate, this is Martha Henderson, the woman who raised me." Martha's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Husband, Clara Meredith, you left here 3 weeks ago and came back married." "It is a long story," Clara said, unable to stop smiling. "But yes, we were married in Silver Ridge." Martha looked between them, taking in their joined hands, the way they stood close together. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she smiled. "Well then, welcome to the family, Mr. Xerxes. I hope you know what you are getting into, marrying this one. She is stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery." "I am counting on it," Nate said, and Martha laughed. They moved into Doc Winter's old house, which came with the practice. It was a comfortable 2-story building with an office and examination room on the ground floor and living quarters above. Clara threw herself into reviving the practice, seeing patients, restocking supplies, and making plans for expansion. Nate proved invaluable. He renovated the examination room, building new cabinets and a proper surgical table. He learned to assist with procedures, his steady hands and calm demeanor making him a natural. He also took over the business side of things, managing accounts and supplies, freeing Clara to focus on patient care. The town embraced them both. People who had been skeptical of Clara as a woman practicing medicine found those doubts erased by her competence and Nate's obvious respect for her skills. The practice thrived. 6 months after their return, Clara realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She was only 24, still establishing her career. But when she told Nate, the look of wonder on his face erased her fears. "We are having a baby," he said, as if testing the words. Then he swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. "We are having a baby." The pregnancy was difficult. Clara suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months and struggled with exhaustion as her belly grew. She stubbornly continued working until the 7th month, when Nate and Martha joined forces to insist she rest. "You cannot deliver babies if you collapse from exhaustion yourself," Martha pointed out. "Listen to your wife and your mother," Nate added, earning a swat from Martha and a laugh from Clara. Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1883, after 12 hours of hard labor that left Clara wrung out and shaking. But when the midwife placed the squalling infant in her arms, she felt such overwhelming love that everything else faded away. "He looks like you," Clara told Nate, who was staring at his son with an expression of complete awe. "He has your nose," Nate countered, reaching out with one finger to gently touch the baby's cheek. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names for months without reaching agreement. Now, looking at her husband and newborn son, Clara knew exactly what felt right. Matthew Xerxes." "Matthew," Nate repeated softly. "It is perfect." Motherhood transformed Clara in ways she had not expected. She still loved her medical work, still found satisfaction in helping people, but her son became the center of her world. Nate was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Matthew during colicky nights without complaint. They hired a young woman named Sarah as a nurse for the practice, allowing Clara to balance her work with motherhood. Sarah was quick and competent, eager to learn. Clara taught her everything Doc Winters had taught her, passing on the knowledge. Matthew grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. He would toddle around the medical office, getting into everything, chattering in his half-formed words. The patients adored him. 2 years after Matthew's birth, Clara became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born after a mercifully short labor. They named her Grace, and she was a quieter child than her brother, content to watch the world with solemn, dark eyes. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Clara's practice continued to grow, and she eventually convinced a young doctor fresh from medical school back east to join her. Dr. Jacob Mills was idealistic and energetic, eager to bring modern medicine to the frontier. Together, they established the first proper hospital in Tonopah Junction. Nate became a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping to organize improvements to infrastructure and safety. He never lost his awareness of danger, never quite shed the watchful habits of a man who had lived rough, but he channeled those instincts into protecting his family and community. Their children grew. Matthew developed his mother's passion for helping people and his father's steady competence. Grace showed an early aptitude for learning, devouring every book she could find. Clara and Nate watched them with pride and wonder, still amazed that their reckless decision to stay together had produced such incredible results. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the medical practice was closed for the day, Clara and Nate would sit together on their porch and watch the desert sunset. They did not need to talk much. After years together, they communicated in glances and touches, in the easy comfort of two people who knew each other completely. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked one such evening. "Giving up your drifting life, settling down?" Nate pulled her closer against his side. "Not for a single second." "Do you regret letting a strange cowboy ride beside you? He was not so strange, just quiet and competent and heroic." "Heroic is a strong word. You literally saved my life, multiple times. I think heroic applies." Clara tilted her head to look up at him. "Though I suppose I saved you too, in a way." "You did. You saved me from a life of loneliness and purposeless wandering. You gave me a reason to be better, to build something lasting." Nate kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Clara Xerxes, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." Clara's eyes prickled with tears. Even after all these years, he could still move her with simple words. "I love you too, always." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Nevada desert in shades of gold and crimson. In the house behind them, their children slept safely. In the town around them, people they had helped and healed went about their lives. And on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds held each other close and knew they were home. The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and occasional sorrows. Matthew decided to become a doctor, following his mother into medicine. Clara taught him herself, passing on not just medical knowledge but the philosophy that healing was about more than just treating symptoms. It was about caring for the whole person, about showing up even when the situation seemed impossible. Grace surprised everyone by developing a passion for law. She left Tonopah Junction at 18 to attend a women's college back east, writing long letters home about her studies and her determination to become one of Nevada's first female lawyers. Clara and Nate were immensely proud, even though they missed her terribly. Martha Henderson lived to see both Clara's children grown, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. Clara mourned the woman who had been mother, mentor, and friend. At the funeral, She spoke about Martha's kindness, her strength, her unwavering support. Nate stood beside her, a solid presence, his hand warm in hers. The hospital Clara had helped establish grew into a significant institution, drawing patients from across the territory. Young doctors came to train there, learning frontier medicine from Clara and her colleagues. She published several papers on desert medicine and the treatment of mining injuries that garnered attention in medical journals back east. Nate's work on the town council helped transform Tanapa Junction from a rough mining camp into a proper town with schools, paved roads, and electric streetlights. He never sought the spotlight, content to work behind the scenes, but everyone knew that much of the town's progress was due to his steady leadership. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nate surprised Clara with a trip back to Silver Ridge. They rode the same route they had taken all those years ago, though now there was a proper road and they traveled in relative comfort rather than desperate urgency. Silver Ridge had grown as well, a thriving mountain town with its own hospital and several doctors. Dr. Harrison was still there, older and grayer but still practicing. He welcomed them with joy, insisting they stay with him and his wife. Over dinner, they shared stories and memories, laughing about the desperate early days and marveling at how much had changed. "You two started something important," Dr. Harrison said. "Not just by bringing the medicine, but by showing people what was possible. You proved that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle." Clara reached for Nate's hand under the table, finding it already reaching for hers. "We just did what needed to be done." "No," Dr. Harrison corrected gently. "You did what needed to be done when no one else would. That is the difference between ordinary people and extraordinary ones." They visited the boarding house where they had spent their wedding night, now expanded and renovated but still recognizable. Mrs. Chen was still running it, and she cried when she saw them, pulling them both into fierce hugs. "I knew you would make it," she said. "I saw it the way you looked at each other, even back then. True love, the kind that lasts." On their last evening in Silver Ridge, Clara and Nate hiked up to the rock where Nate had proposed. They sat in the same spot, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same spectacular colors. 10 years, Clara mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like we have always been together. "Both are true," Nate said. "That is the strange thing about love. It exists outside normal time." Clara leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and the familiar smell that was uniquely Nate. "Do you remember what I said that night, about expanding the practice, bringing in more doctors? I remember you had big dreams. You have achieved most of them." "We have achieved them, together." Clara took his hand. "I could not have done any of it without you." "That is not true. You would have found a way. You always do." Nate turned to face her fully. "But I am grateful you let me be part of it. Grateful that you saw something worth saving in a drifter cowboy who had given up on everything. I saw what was always there. I just reminded you." They kissed as the sun set, and Clara felt the same flutter in her stomach she had felt at their first kiss. Some things never changed. Some magic never faded. When they returned to Tanapa Junction, they threw themselves back into their work with renewed energy. Matthew graduated from medical school and joined his mother's practice, bringing fresh ideas and new techniques. Grace finished law school and returned to Nevada, opening a practice that focused on defending minors and their families against unfair labor practices. Clara watched her children find their own paths and felt profound satisfaction. She and Nate had created not just a family, but a legacy of service and compassion. Their children would carry on that legacy and hopefully pass it to their own children in turn. On their 20th anniversary, The town organized a celebration in Clara and Nate's honor. The entire community turned out, sharing stories of how the couple had touched their lives. A young miner spoke about how Clara had saved his wife during a difficult childbirth. An elderly woman told how Nate had rebuilt her house after a fire, refusing any payment. A child proudly displayed the wooden toy Nate had carved for him during a long recovery from scarlet fever. Clara stood on the makeshift stage, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. She looked out at the crowd and saw the faces of people she had healed, people Nate had helped, people they had both served over the years. She saw her children standing proudly in the front row, Matthew with his wife and their new baby, Grace with her law partner and close friend. 20 years ago, Clara began, her voice shaking slightly, I set out to carry medicine across 40 miles of dangerous land. I thought I was alone. I thought I had to be strong enough, brave enough, determined enough to do it all myself. Then a cowboy rode beside me without being asked, and everything changed. She looked at Nate, who stood next to her, his gray eyes soft with emotion. He taught me that strength is not about standing alone. It is about having the courage to let someone stand with you. It is about building something together that neither of you could create alone. These 20 years have been the greatest adventure of my life, not because they were easy, but because I shared them with a partner who never wavered, never quit, never stopped believing in what we could accomplish together. Clara reached for Nate's hand. So thank you all for coming tonight, for being part of our community, for letting us serve you. But most of all, thank you to the man who changed my life by simply choosing to ride beside me. I love you, Nathaniel Xerxes. The crowd erupted in applause, but Clara barely heard it. She was looking at Nate, at the tears tracking down his weathered face, at the smile that transformed him into the young man she had first met all those years ago. I would do it all again, he said, loud enough for her to hear over the noise. Every mile, every moment. I would choose you 1,000 times. Only 1,000, Clara teased through her own tears. 1,000,000 then. However many times you need to hear it. They kissed, and the crowd cheered louder. Clara laughed against Nate's lips, feeling young and alive and infinitely blessed. The years rolled on. Clara and Nate grew older, their hair turning gray, their faces marking with lines earned through laughter and tears, and a lifetime of living. They celebrated the births of grandchildren, mourned the loss of old friends, watched as Tanapa Junction transformed from a frontier town into a modern city. Matthew took over the medical practice as Clara gradually reduced her hours. She still saw patients, particularly the ones who had been with her for years, but she also took time to write, documenting her experiences and medical observations for future generations. Grace became one of Nevada's most prominent attorneys, arguing cases before the state's Supreme Court and winning landmark decisions for workers' rights. She married her law partner, a brilliant woman named Elizabeth, and together they adopted 2 children who called Clara and Nate Grandma and Grandpa with the same enthusiasm as Matthew's biological children. On Clara's 65th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration. 3 generations filled the house that had once belonged to Doc Winters, now expanded and remodeled but still fundamentally the same. Children ran through the rooms while adults talked and laughed. The dinner table was crowded and chaotic and perfect. Nate, now 67 and still strong despite the silver in his hair and the stiffness in his joints, raised a glass to toast his wife. To Clara, who has spent her life healing bodies and souls, who never met a challenge she would not face head-on, who made a foolish drifter believe he could be worthy of a good life. You are my heart, my home, my everything. Happy birthday, my love. Clara wiped at her eyes, moved as always by Nate's simple eloquence. "And to you, the man who rode beside me when I needed him most and has never left my side since. You are my greatest adventure, my dearest friend, my truest love." Their children and grandchildren cheered, raising their own glasses. Later, when the party had wound down and the younger grandchildren had been put to bed, Clara and Nate sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. "You think we did all right?" Clara asked softly. "With our lives, our children, everything?" Nate was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think we did better than all right. I think we built something beautiful, not perfect, but real and lasting and full of love." "I agree." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "I have no regrets." "Neither do I." They sat in comfortable silence, the swing creaking gently. From inside the house came the soft sounds of family. Matthew telling stories to his children, Grace and Elizabeth discussing a case, the baby making happy cooing noises. It was the sound of a life well lived, of love multiplied across generations. "What do you suppose happens next?" Clara wondered aloud. "More of the same, I hope. More sunrises and sunsets, more time with family, more years together." Nate kissed the top of her head. "Whatever comes, as long as I face it with you, I am not afraid. Neither am I." The years continued. Clara and Nate celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by an even larger family. They traveled when they could, revisiting old haunts and making new memories. They weathered health scares and losses, supporting each other through the challenges of aging. Matthew's oldest son decided to become a doctor, the third generation to carry on the healing tradition. Grace and Elizabeth's adopted daughter showed interest in law, already debating with fierce intelligence at age 12. The legacy continued. Clara published her memoirs at age 70, a detailed account of her years practicing frontier medicine. The book became unexpectedly popular, inspiring young women across the country to pursue medical careers. She received letters from readers telling her how her story had changed their lives, given them courage to pursue their dreams. Nate finally retired from the town council at 72, though he remained active in community affairs. He spent more time woodworking, creating beautiful furniture and toys for his ever-growing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. His workshop became a gathering place where young people came to learn and talk, drawn by his quiet wisdom and patient teaching. On a crisp October morning just after Clara's 75th birthday, she woke to find Nate already up and dressed, standing at the bedroom window looking out at the desert. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The first time I saw you," Nate said. "Watching you ride out of Tanapa Junction before dawn, determined to do the impossible. I knew right then that you would change my life. I just did not know how completely." Clara leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You changed mine too, gave me everything I did not know I was missing." "We have been lucky," Nate observed. "Not everyone gets 53 years together. 53 years and counting. We are not done yet." "No," Nate agreed, smiling. "Not yet." They stood together watching the sunrise. Two people who had found each other in the dangerous beauty of the Nevada desert and built a life that exceeded anything either had dared to dream. Behind them, their house held the evidence of that life. Photographs of children and grandchildren, medical journals bearing Clara's name, furniture built by Nate's skilled hands, 1,000 small treasures accumulated over decades of love. The sun climbed higher, bathing the desert in golden light. Somewhere a bird sang. The day beckoned with its small demands and simple pleasures. Clara and Nate turned from the window and faced it together, hand in hand, the way they had faced every challenge and joy for more than half a century. In the afternoon, They took a ride out into the desert, mounted on gentle horses suited to their age. They followed the old trail toward Silver Ridge, though they did not go far, just enough to feel the open space around them, to remember what it felt like to ride side by side across dangerous land. They stopped at a familiar spot, a place where the trail curved around a rock formation shaped like a sleeping giant. Nate dismounted and helped Clara down, his hands still strong and sure despite the arthritis that plagued his joints. "This is where we stopped that first day," Clara said, recognition washing over her. "Where you finally told me your name. I thought you were the most stubborn, foolish, brave woman I had ever met," Nate recalled, smiling. "I still think that. And I thought you were an arrogant cowboy who did not understand that I could take care of myself." Clara laughed. "I was half right. Only half. You were not arrogant, just confident. There is a difference." They sat on the same flat rock where they had rested 53 years before, looking out at a landscape that had barely changed even as everything else transformed around it. The desert was eternal, patient, indifferent to human concerns. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not followed me that day?" Clara asked. "All the time," Nate admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, to letting you go on alone. It scares me how easily I might have missed the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you did not ride past. You followed your instincts, your good heart. That is who you are." "Who you made me," Nate corrected. "I was lost before I found you." Clara took his weathered hand in hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "We found each other. That is what matters." They sat until the afternoon light began to soften, talking about memories and children and grandchildren, making plans for the future, even though the future grew shorter with each passing year. When they finally rose to leave, Nate pulled Clara into his arms and kissed her with the same passion he had shown as a young man. "I love you," he said when they parted. "More than words can express, more than actions can show. You are everything." Clara felt tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "And I love you, my cowboy, my partner, my home." They rode back to Tanapa Junction as the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert. When they reached their house, family was waiting. Matthew and his wife had brought dinner. Grace and Elizabeth had come with the children. The house filled with noise and laughter and life. Clara watched it all from her favorite chair, Nate beside her as always, and felt complete satisfaction. This was what they had built together. Not just a house, or a medical practice, or a legacy of service, but a family bound by love and strengthened by the example of two people who had chosen each other every single day for more than 5 decades. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Clara and Nate prepared for bed. It was their routine, comforting in its familiarity. They moved around each other with the ease of long partnership, no words necessary. In bed, Clara curled against Nate's side, her head on his shoulder in the position they had slept in for thousands of nights. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "Thank you," Clara whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For riding beside me, for staying. For choosing me every day, for giving me the most extraordinary life." Nate's arm tightened around her. "The thanks should be mine. You saved me, Clara, in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other." "Yes," Nate agreed softly. "We did." They lay in the darkness, two hearts beating in tandem, two lives completely intertwined. Outside, the Nevada night wrapped around them, vast and starlit and eternal. And in their bed, in their home, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on courage and love, Clara and Nate held each other close and knew they had found what so many people search for and never find. A love worth every risk, every sacrifice, every challenge. A love that would last until the end of their days and beyond, written into the lives they had touched, the children they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. A love that began when a cowboy rode beside a woman without being asked, and continued through every sunset and sunrise that followed. The years would continue to turn. There would be more grandchildren, more celebrations, more quiet evenings watching the desert transform from day to night. There would be inevitable losses and sorrows, the slow surrender to time that comes for everyone. But through it all, Clara and Nate would face everything together, hand in hand, heart to heart, the way they had from that first dangerous journey across 40 miles of Nevada desert. And when their time finally came, when the last sunset faded and the final stars emerged, they would leave behind a legacy not just of medicine and service, but of what it means to truly love another person, completely, faithfully, courageously, without reservation or regret. Their story would be told to their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, a tale of bravery and romance, of medicine carried across dangerous land, and a cowboy who rode beside her without being asked. It would become family legend, the foundation story that explained where they came from and what they valued. But for Clara and Nate, it was never a story. It was simply their life, lived fully and without regret. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, that was everything.